The Spirit of Storytelling with Julian Gartside.
Next morning, Knulp got up early and made use of the tanner's razor. But the tanner had worn a full beard for years, and the razor was so neglected that Knulp had to hone it on his braces for half an hour before it would cut. When he had finished, he put on his coat, picked up his shoes and went down to the kitchen, where it was warm and already smelled of coffee. He asked the tanner's wife for a brush and polish for his shoes. "Go along," she cried. "That's not the kind of work for a man. Let me do it." But that he would not allow, and when finally, with an awkward laugh, she set down the brush and polish before him, he did the work thoroughly, neatly, and with the playful ease of a man who did manual labour only very occasionally, when in the mood, but then cheerfully and with great care. "Beautiful," said the tanner's wife admiringly, and looked at him. "As if you were going to see your sweetheart." "Oh, I wish I were." "I believe you. I'll bet you've got a pretty one." She laughed again, insinuatingly. "Maybe more than one." "Oh, that wouldn't be nice," said Knulp reproachfully. "I can show you a picture of her." She stepped eagerly closer as he drew his oilcloth portfolio from his pocket and took out the picture of Dusa. She studied it with interest. She's high class," she began cautiously. "Almost like a real lady, but kind of skinny. Is her health all right?" "Oh yes, as far as I know. But now I'll go say hello to the old man. I can hear him in the big room." He went into the room and bade the tanner good morning. The room had been swept and looked friendly and homelike, with its light-coloured panelling, its clock, its mirror, and the photographs on the wall. A cosy room like this, thought Knulp, isn't bad in the winter, but it's not really worth marrying for. The favour shown him by the tanner's wife gave him no pleasure at all. When they had had their coffee, he went out to the back with Rothfuss, who showed him through the tannery. Knulp knew almost every trade, and amazed his friend by his knowledgeable questions. "How do you know all that?" he asked with animation. "Anyone would think you were a journeyman tanner, or at least that you'd been one." "A travelling man learns all sorts of things," said Knulp modestly. "Come to think of it, I learned about tanning from you. Don't you remember? 6 or 7 years ago, when we were on the road together, I made you tell me all about it." "And you still remember all that?" "Well, some of it, Rothfuss. But I won't take up any more of your time. Too bad. I'd like to have given you a hand, but it's so damp and stuffy down there. And I've still got this cough. Oh, goodbye for now, old man. I'll take a little turn in town while the rain holds off." And neatly brushed, his brown felt hat tilted back just a little, he sauntered off with a light, jaunty step, carefully skirting the puddles. Rothfuss stood in the doorway, looking after him. "Lucky man," Tanner reflected with a twinge of envy. And on his way to the tanning pits, Rothfuss thought about his eccentric friend, who wanted nothing of life but to look on, and the tanner could not have said whether this was asking too much or too little. A man who worked hard and got ahead was better off in many ways, but he could never have such delicate, graceful hands or walk with so light and jaunty a step. No, Knulp was right in doing what his nature demanded, and what few others could do, in speaking to strangers like a child does, and winning their hearts, in saying pleasant things to ladies of all ages, and making Sundays out of weekdays. You could only take him as he was, and when he needed a roof over his head, well, it was a pleasure and an honour to give him one. Indeed, you almost wanted to thank him, for he brought lightness and gaiety into the house, Meanwhile, his guest, happy and alert with curiosity, strolled through the town, whistling a military march through his teeth and taking his time about it. Sought out the places and people he knew from former days. First, he climbed a steep hill to an outlying slum where he knew an unfortunate tailor, Schlotterbeck by name, who was forever mending old trousers and was seldom given a new suit to make. A great pity, for he was skilled at his trade. He had started out with high hopes and worked in good shops, but he had married young. He already had several children, and his wife had little talent for housekeeping. Knulp found the tailor on the third floor of a house, set back from the street. His little workshop hung like a bird's nest over the void, for the house was built on the hillside, and when you looked down from the windows, you not only had the 3 stories below you, but further on a steep slope covered with pathetic slanting gardens and patches of grass and ending in a grey confusion of chicken coops, rabbit hutches and woodsheds. The near roofs that could be seen lay far below at the bottom of the valley. However, the workshop was light and airy, and as he sat cross-legged on his big table by the window, the tailor could look out over the world like a lighthouse keeper. "Morning, Schlotterbeck," said Knulp, stepping into the room. Blinded by the bright light, the tailor narrowed his eyes and peered in the direction of the door. "Ah, Knulp," he cried joyfully, and held out his hand. "Back in town? And what's wrong to bring you all the way up here?" Knulp pulled up a 3-legged stool and sat down. "Give me a needle and a bit of your best brown wool. I want to check my equipment." He removed his coat and vest, selected his yarn, threaded a needle, and with vigilant eyes inspected his whole suit, which still looked as good as new. Whenever he discovered a thin spot, a loose trimming or a button that was not quite tight, he set it to rights with nimble fingers. "And how are you otherwise?" Schlotterbeck asked. "The weather hasn't been so good, but then if a man has his health and no family..." Knulp cleared his throat argumentatively. "Yes, of course," he said wearily. "The Lord sends down his rain on the righteous and unrighteous alike, and only the tailors keep dry. But you're never satisfied, are you, Schlotterbeck?" "Oh, Knulp, I am not complaining, but listen to the children screaming in there. There are 5 of them now, and here I sit, working my fingers to the bone till late at night, and it's never enough. And all you do is gad about." "Wrong, my friend. I was in the hospital for 4 or 5 weeks in Neustadt, and they don't keep a man a minute longer than he absolutely needs. And nobody would stay any longer anyway. The ways of the Lord are strange, friend." "Oh, you keep your pious sayings to yourself." Lost your religion, eh? I've just been trying to get religion, and that's why I came to see you. I want you to tell me all about it." "Don't bother me with religion." "In the hospital, you say? Well, I'm sorry to hear that." "Oh, never mind, it's over now. I want you to tell me about Ecclesiasticus and Revelation. You see, I had plenty of time in the hospital, and they had a Bible. Well, I read nearly all of it, so now I can put in a word too. A curious book, the Bible. You've got something there. It's curious, all right. Half of it must be lies, because nothing fits together. Maybe you understand it better, because you went to Latin school." "I don't remember much of that." "You see, Knulp," the tailor spat through the open window and stared. There was bitterness in his face. "Religion is no good. It's no good. And I'm through with it. I'm through with it." The vagrant looked at him thoughtfully. "Really? Aren't you going too far, old friend? Seems to me there are some very good things in the Bible." "Sure. And when you read a little further, you always find the opposite." "No, I'm fed up with it. fed up. Knulp had risen and picked up an iron. You could put a few chunks of coal on the fire, he suggested. Oh, what for? Well, I'd like to iron my waistcoat a little, and it won't do my hat any harm either after all that rain. Yeah, still the same old dandy, cried Schlotterbeck with a note of irritation. What's the good of dressing like a duke when you're half starved? Knulp smiled serenely. It looks better, and it gives me pleasure. And if you don't want to do it out of piety, just do it to be nice and to please an old friend. The tailor left the room and soon came back with a hot iron. That's fine, said Knulp. Thank you. Cautiously, he began to smooth the brim of his hat. But he was not as skillful at ironing as he was at sewing. His friend took the iron out of his hand and did it himself. Well, that's very kind of you, said Knulp. Now it's a Sunday hat again. But look here, tailor, you ask too much of the Bible. The way I see it, everybody's got to figure out for himself what's true and what life is like. Those are things you can't learn from any book. The Bible is old. In those days, people didn't know a good many things that we know today. But for that very reason, there are a lot of fine things in it, and true things too. Parts of it, I thought, were like a beautiful picture book. The way that girl, Ruth, goes through the fields gleaning, well, that's beautiful. You can smell the warm summer in it. Or the way the Saviour sits down with the little children and thinks. You mean a lot more to me than all those grown-ups with their pride, he says. If you ask me, he was right, and we can learn from him. Yeah, Schlotterbeck admitted. That's a fact. But it's easier to do that with other people's children than to have 5 of your own and not know how you're going to feed them. He relapsed into bitter gloom, and Knulp couldn't bear to see him like that. He resolved that before leaving, he would say something to cheer him up. He thought a little, and then he leaned towards the tailor, looked earnestly into his face with his bright eyes, and said softly, But don't you love your children? The tailor stared at Knulp in horror. Well, of course I do. How can you say such a thing? Of course I love them, especially the oldest. Knulp nodded earnestly. I'm going now, Schlotterbeck, and many thanks. My waistcoat is worth twice as much now. But you've got to be kindly and cheerful with your children. That's food and drink to them. And now listen, I'm going to tell you something that nobody knows and that you needn't repeat. Mollified, the tailor looked attentively into Knulp's clear blue eyes, which had grown grave. Knulp spoke so softly that the tailor had difficulty in understanding him. Look at me. You envy me, you think. He has no family and no worries, but you're all wrong. I have a child, a little fellow, 2 years old. He was taken in by strangers because his father was unknown and his mother died in childbed. Ah, there's no need for you to know what city he's in. But I know, and when I go there, I creep up to the house, I stand by the fence and wait, and when I'm in luck, I see the little fellow. But I can't hold out my hand to him, or give him a kiss. The most I can ever do is whistle a tune for him as I go by. Well, that's how it is. Goodbye now, and be glad you have children. Knulp continued on his way through the town. He stood for a while, chatting at the window of the turner's shop and watched the swift play of the curly wood shavings. Further on, he stopped to say hello to the constable, who was devoted to him and held out his birchwood snuff-box. Wherever he went, old friends related the lesser and greater incidents of family and workshop. He heard of the untimely death of the municipal accountant's wife and of how the mayor's son had been misbehaving. And in return, he reported on events in other towns, taking pleasure in the tenuous, good-humoured ties which he, as friend, acquaintance and sharer of secrets, had formed here and there with the more settled members of the population. It was Saturday. He stopped in the gateway of a brewery to ask the journeyman coopers where there would be dancing that evening and the next day. There were several places, but the best was the Lion at Gertelfingen, only half an hour away. That, he decided, was where he would take Barbela, the girl next door. It was nearly lunchtime, and as Knulp climbed the stairs of the Rothfuss house, a pleasantly pungent smell came his way. He stopped still and breathed in the balm with boyish pleasure and curiosity. Despite the lightness of his step, the tanner's wife had heard him. She flung open the kitchen door and stood in the bright opening, clouded in the steam of her cooking. "Ah, Herr Knulp," she cried out affectionately. "I'm glad you were so early. You see, we're having liver dumplings, and I thought maybe I could fry up a slice of liver just for you, if you like. How do you feel about it?" Knulp stroked his cheek and made a courtly gesture. "Why should there be something special for me? I'll be only too happy with a dish of soup." "That's no way to talk. When a man's been sick, he needs proper nourishment. He's got to get his strength back. But maybe you don't care for liver. Well, some people don't." He laughed modestly. "Oh, I'm not one of those. A dish of liver dumplings is a Sunday dinner. If I could have them every Sunday of my life, I'd be perfectly happy. While you're staying with us, you must have everything you want. And what did I learn to cook for? Just speak up. There's an extra slice of liver. I've saved it for you. It would do you good." She came closer and gave him an encouraging smile. He understood quite well what she meant, and she was rather pretty, but he pretended not to notice. He played with his fine hat that the poor tailor had ironed and looked to one side. Thank you, Frau Rothfuss. Thank you for your kindness, but I really prefer dumplings. You've been spoiling me enough as it is." She smiled and threatened him with her forefinger. "You don't have to act so bashful. It doesn't convince me anyway. Dumplings, then, with plenty of onions, eh?" "Well, I can't say no to that." She went busily back to her stove, while he went into the big room, where the table had already been laid. He sat reading yesterday's paper until the tanner came in and the soup was served. When the meal was over, the three of them played cards for a little while, and Knulp amazed his hostess with a few hazardous and graceful new card tricks. He had a playfully negligent way of shuffling and then gathering up the deck with the speed of lightning. He tossed his card on the table with an elegant gesture and occasionally ran his thumb over the edge of his cards. The tanner watched him with the admiration and indulgence that unprofitable skills arouse in a hard-working citizen. But his wife observed these signs of savoir-vivre with knowing interest. Her eyes rested attentively on his long, graceful hands, which no hard work had ever disfigured. Through the small window panes, a thin, uncertain beam of sunlight poured into the room, passed over the table and the cards, played fitfully with the faint shadows on the floor, and circled tremulously round the pale blue ceiling. Knulp's eyes sparkled as he took it all in, the play of the February sun, the peace and quiet of the house, his friend's grave, work-hardened face, and the pretty woman's veiled glances. He didn't like it. This wasn't his aim in life. This wasn't his kind of happiness. If my health were better, and if it were summer, he thought, I wouldn't stay here an hour longer. "I think I'll follow the sun for a while," he said, as Rothfuss picked up the cards and looked at the clock. He went downstairs with the tanner, left him in the drying shed with his skins, and wandered off through the dismal grass plot, which extended, interspersed with tanning pits, down to the river. There, the tanner had built a little board pier to stand on when washing his skins. Knulp sat down on the pier, letting his feet dangle over the swift, silent stream, and watched with delight the dark fish darting here and there below him. Then he studied his surroundings, trying to figure out a way of speaking to the little servant girl next door. The gardens of the two houses adjoined, separated only by a broken-down lath fence. Down by the water, the fence poles had long since rotted away, and one could pass without difficulty from one garden to the other. The neighbour's garden seemed better kept than the tanner's tangled grass plot. Knulp could see 4 little vegetable patches, overgrown with weeds as they are in the winter-time, 2 meagre borders of lettuce and winter spinach, and a number of bowed rose bushes, their crowns buried in the ground. Farther up, there were several handsome fir trees which hid the house. After a careful study of the neighbour's garden, Knulp crept silently as far as the fir trees. Between them he could see the house with the kitchen at the back. He'd not long to wait before he saw the girl, her sleeves rolled up, at work in the kitchen. The lady of the house was with her, giving orders, showing her one thing and another, as women must do when unwilling to pay an experienced maid. They take on a beginner every year, and then are always full of praises for the girl who has just left. But the tone in which she instructed and found fault was without malice. Apparently, the new girl was already used to it, for she went about her work calmly and with an unruffled brow. The intruder stood leaning against a tree, watching and listening with the vigilance of a hunter and the serene patience of a man whose time is cheap and who has learned to enjoy life as a spectator. It gave him pleasure to watch the young girl whenever she appeared at the window. The rest of the time, he listened and gathered from her employer's speech that she was not a native of Leckstetten, but of some place further up in the valley. Chewing on a fragrant fir twig, he listened patiently for half an hour, and then another half an hour, until at length the lady of the house disappeared and all was silent in the kitchen. He waited a little longer, then approached quietly and tapped on the kitchen window with a dry branch. The girl paid no attention, and he had to knock again. But this time, she came to the half-open window, opened it wide, and looked out. "Goodness! What are you doing here?" she exclaimed in a whisper. "I almost had a fright." "How could I frighten anybody?" said Knulp with a smile. "I just wanted to say hello, see how you were getting along. Besides, it's Saturday. I wanted to ask if you could take a little walk with me tomorrow afternoon." She shook her head. The look on her face was so woebegone that he felt really sorry for her. "No," she said in a friendly tone. "I won't be off tomorrow, only in the morning to go to church." Knulp muttered. "But then you could go out with me this evening?" "Well, yes, I'll be free, but I mean to write a letter to my people at home." "Oh, you'll write your letter an hour later. He won't go out tonight anyway. I was so looking forward to a little chat with you. We could have such a nice walk this evening, if it doesn't rain pitchforks. So, be nice. You're not afraid of me, are you?" "I'm not afraid of anybody, certainly not of you. But I can't. If they see me out walking with a man, but Barbela, nobody knows you here. Besides, it's no sin, and it's nobody's business. You're not a schoolgirl anymore. So don't forget, I'll be waiting at 8 o'clock down by the gymnasium. You know, next to the cattle market. Or should I come earlier? Well, I can if you like." No, not earlier. No, Look, don't come at all. It's impossible. He displayed his boyish, crestfallen look. Well, if you don't feel like it, he said sadly. It seemed to me you are all alone and a stranger here, and you must be homesick sometime. And me too. We could have talked a little. I'd have liked to hear more about Axthausen because of being there once. But I can't force you. And don't take it amiss. Well, why should I take it amiss? It's just that I can't. You're free this evening, Barbela. You just don't want to come. But maybe you'll change your mind. I've got to go now, but look, I'll be outside the gymnasium this evening, and if nobody comes, I'll go for a walk by myself, and I'll think of you writing your letter to Axthausen. So goodbye, and no hard feeling. He gave a quick nod, and was gone before she could say anything more. She saw him vanish behind the trees, and a look of perplexity came over her face. Then she went back to her work, and suddenly she began, the lady of the house had gone out, to sing for all she was worth. Knulp heard her. He was sitting on the tanner's pier again, rolling little balls from a piece of bread he had put in his pocket at lunch. He dropped the bread balls gently into the water, one after another, and watched musingly as they drifted a little way with the current and sank to the dark bottom, where they were snapped up by the silent, ghost-like fishes.